There's only two things stopping you. Fear and common sense. And I'm gonna cut your fucking head off.
There's a very specific kind of Hollywood story that almost never gets told honestly. The story of someone who became famous so fast they never actually learned how to handle it. Not a tragic fall from grace, not a cautionary tale with a clean moral, just a long, slow, slightly baffling slide from blockbuster action hero to diplomatic footnote in Russia. That's the story of Steven Seagal, and it's weirder, sadder, and honestly funnier than you probably remember. Because this is a guy who had everything handed to him, burned through most of it, and never quite seemed to understand what he'd lost. The thing about Seagal's rise is that it didn't follow any normal script. He wasn't grinding through auditions in a one-bedroom apartment in Burbank. He wasn't doing student films or regional theater. He was running an Aikido dojo in Los Angeles. And one day, through a combination of timing, charisma, and sheer luck, a man named Michael Ovitz walked in. Ovitz wasn't just some nobody. He was one of the most powerful agents in Hollywood, and something about the sight of this guy in a GI, tossing students around with a completely expressionless face, made him think, this man belongs on television. So Ovitz funded a 5-minute screen test, brought it to Warner Brothers, and the execs liked what they saw. Then Seagal did a live demonstration on the studio lot, brought his own students, threw them around like crash test dummies, and Warner signed him on the spot. He was given the lead role in Above the Law in 1988. No supporting parts, no small roles to build up to it. Straight to the lead, the movie cost $7 million and pulled in $19 million. Critics, who you'd expect to tear apart an action film starring a martial arts instructor with 0 acting credits, actually kind of liked it, including Roger Ebert. That same year, Warner released Bloodsport with another total unknown, a Belgian dancer named Van Damme. 2 brand new action stars in a single calendar year, both launched from the same studio. The genre was on fire, and Seagal had just been handed the torch. What followed was about as clean a run as you can have in Hollywood. Hard to Kill pulled in around $50 million on a $12 million budget. Numbers that, adjusted for inflation, looked genuinely extraordinary. Marked for Death and Out for Justice kept the streak alive, the latter being notably brutal. And not just by Seagal standards, it was one of the most violent action films of 1990. And that was the censored version with a significant chunk of the neck-breaking already removed. 5 films, all profitable. It was a straight flush, and it gave him something very dangerous: total confidence. The peak came with Under Siege in 1992. Warner had paid $1 million for the script, originally titled Dreadnought, from the writer of Pretty Woman, who had filled the first draft with nuclear warheads, sinking aircraft carriers, and things being launched into space. The studio politely asked him to bring the cost back down to something achievable on the same planet. They offered Seagal a then-record $5 million paycheck with one condition. Navy regulations prohibited hair longer than 10 centimeters, meaning the ponytail had to go. Now, Seagal reportedly argued that his character was such a legend that the president himself had granted special permission for the hair. The studio listened, nodded, and sent him to a barber. The film was directed by Andrew Davis, who had also made Above the Law, and it came together in about 2.5 months. Test audiences loved it, but hated the title. Nobody knew what a dreadnought was, so it became Under Siege. There was also casting drama that didn't make it onto any press release at the time. Pamela Anderson was reportedly almost cast in the lead female role, but according to Anderson herself, she was told there were hundreds of other women waiting for the part, and that she'd need to let the film's star get a bit handsy if she wanted it. She walked out. The role went to her Baywatch co-star Erika Eleniak, who later said Seagal behaved like a perfect gentleman, a claim Gary Busey strongly disputed, saying he personally had to intervene on set multiple times. 2 contradictory accounts, 2 people with reasons not to be neutral about Seagal. Make of that what you will. The studio was so worried about critical bias against action films, specifically against Seagal, that they made it the most expensive film ever. At that point, not to have a press screening. Turned out they didn't need to worry. It earned $157 million worldwide on a $35 million budget, became his best-reviewed film, and was so dominant in its premise that it literally forced Die Hard 3 to scrap an entire script. The original plan had Bruce Willis saving hostages on a ship. and that was now too similar to what Seagal had just done. Wait, when your movie reshapes a franchise that's not yours, you've made something that matters. And then, right on cue, the ego took over completely. After Under Siege hit, Seagal decided he was also a director. 2 studios agreed to fund this experiment. Fox offered him the director's chair on Man of Honor with a $30 million budget. Warner went further. Pick any script you want, more money, just agree to do Under Siege 2 eventually. Seagal chose a script called On Deadly Ground, negotiated the budget up to $40 million, then waved goodbye to Fox and got to work. What followed was the production equivalent of watching someone set fire to a house they just moved into. He kept rewriting scenes from the script he had personally chosen. He reshot entire sequences. He got into physical altercations with stuntmen. The budget climbed to $50 million. When test audiences saw it, people literally fell asleep. The original ending, which reportedly featured deer, rabbits, dolphins, and all living things rejoicing because Steven had saved them, had to be cut. The film grossed $39 million. At the 1995 Razzies, it received nominations for Worst Actor, Worst Director, and Worst Picture. He won Worst Director. Warner pulled it from international release. Here's where a smarter person might have recalibrated. Warner still wanted to work with him. They greenlit Under Siege 2, and that should have been the moment to come back strong, deliver something clean, and reset the narrative. Instead, Seagal showed up for the sequel in noticeably different shape, reportedly wearing a corset to look slimmer rather than doing the less comfortable work of actually training. He spent the production offering unsolicited directorial advice to director Jeff Murphy. There were fresh accusations that female roles were being given only to actresses who complied with personal requests. Behind the scenes, a producer had signed Gary Busey to return as a villain without Seagal's approval, on a pay-or-play contract, meaning Busey would get paid whether he appeared or not. When Seagal found out, he reportedly had Busey removed from the film and paid him $750,000 out of his own pocket to make it go away. That context is worth keeping in mind whenever Busey later turned up in interviews, talking about what a nightmare Seagal was to be around. There's also a footnote here that's become more interesting over time. Under Siege 2 wasn't originally a sequel at all. The script was called Dark Territory, written by then unknown writer named Matt Reeves. Yes, that Matt Reeves, the guy now running the DC Batman franchise. Warner Brothers simply bought the script, slapped the Under Siege 2 title on it, and tweaked the plot to fit an unstoppable action hero. Essentially, Batman, but on a train and with a ponytail. During post-production, Seagal refused to leave the editing room, actively controlling how the film was cut, and the version that hit theaters in 1995 was essentially his. It opened, immediately lost to Apollo 13, dropped out of the top 10 within weeks, and finished at $105 million on a $60 million budget. Profitable, maybe. A comeback, absolutely not. The next project, Executive Decision, was supposed to fix all of this. But Warner had actually traded away the rights to Forrest Gump to acquire that script. An exchange that in hindsight looks like they handed over a Rembrandt for a coupon. At the time though, Forrest Gump looked risky and Executive Decision looked like a guaranteed hit at the peak of action film popularity, with Seagal personally interested in the project. Then he delivered 2 expensive back-to-back flops, and suddenly the studio's confidence wobbled. They brought in Kurt Russell as a co-lead rather than a sidekick. Equal billing, equal screen time. Seagal was unhappy. He clashed with cast and crew throughout filming, and reportedly made John Leguizamo's experience particularly unpleasant. Leguizamo kept laughing at Seagal's extremely serious demeanor, which only made things worse. Then the Me Too adjacent coverage that had been building around Seagal's name started getting louder, and Russell told the studio he would quit if Seagal remained in the lead role. The studio blinked. They rewrote the script to have Seagal's character die early, splitting his scenes among other cast members. He filmed it quietly, accepting the demotion rather than risk Warner canceling his entire contract. His name disappeared from promotional materials, from the opening credits, from most posters. The film still earned $122 million on a $55 million budget. But Seagal was essentially a ghost in it. The biggest beneficiary, oddly, was Leguizamo, whose expanded screen time boosted his career considerably. The Glimmer Man and Fire Down Below followed, and both were disasters. But The Glimmer Man got its budget slashed from $75 million to $45 million when the studio's confidence evaporated, key scenes were dropped, and it grossed just $20 million. Warner then did the opposite, decided The Glimmer Man had failed because of the budget cuts, threw $60 million at Fire Down Below and watched it earn $16 million. For context, The Matrix came out roughly a year later on only slightly more money, and still looks stunning. Fire Down Below got 4 Razzie nominations. The studio hit pause. Exit Wounds in 2001 was his last real theatrical moment. Produced by Joel Silver, it earned around $80 million, and depending on which budget figure you believe, estimates range wildly between $33 million and $55 million. It was either a legitimate success or barely broke even. People were calling it his comeback. It might have been, and if he'd had any interest in the playbook that actually saves careers at that stage, Schwarzenegger leaned into comedy. Stallone tried it, sort of. Jackie Chan had basically built his entire second act on being funny about being tough. Seagal had zero interest in self-awareness, reportedly none on set either. His humorlessness was apparently a running joke among crew members by this point. And he'd stopped caring about his physical condition entirely, which might have worked comedically, but not in the straight-faced action films he kept insisting on making. Exit Wounds was the last film he made with a budget over $20 million. After the 2002 film Half Past Dead, the average budget of his movies dropped to around $6 million. He became a straight-to-video institution. Films designed almost exclusively for people who specifically want to watch Steven Seagal break arms. A role in Robert Rodriguez's Machete got him onto a poster one more time. And then there was Steven Seagal, Lawman, a reality show that ran from 2009 to 2014, following him around Louisiana and Arizona as he worked alongside real sheriffs and applied Aikido philosophy to actual law enforcement situations. Some critics genuinely called it a masterpiece of unintentional comedy. For the past several years, he's been in Russia, serving as a special representative for humanitarian relations between Russia and the United States. How that's going is perhaps not something that requires too much commentary. What's strange about the whole arc is the gap between what Seagal taught and what he practiced. Aikido is fundamentally about reading force, redirecting it, adapting in real time. His entire martial philosophy is built on the idea that rigidity gets you hurt and flow keeps you standing. And yet, as a career, as a personality, as a professional, he was one of the most rigid people in the room. Every time. He couldn't take direction. He couldn't accept co-billing. He couldn't pivot to something lighter when the serious action hero era ended. He couldn't even show up in shape for his own sequel. Success came to him so immediately from his very first film that he never had the experience of failing early and learning from it, which turns out to be one of the more important experiences a person in a fragile industry can have. Some careers end with a dramatic moment. Seagal's just sort of thinned out over years until there was nothing left to thin. If you found this story interesting, hit subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from, and we'd love to have you along for the next one.